my journey starts way back. I was going to marry a man when I was in my late teens. He was my high school sweetheart. And he ended up dying of cancer about a month before our wedding date. So, you know, I was in this hospital in Boston, in Children's Hospital at the time, with a lot of kids that had cancer. And I remember the doctor sitting across the table from me and saying, "We are so close to a cure." That was 42 years ago. 42 years ago, he said, "We are so close to a cure." And I thought, you know, here we are, 42 years later. We haven't moved forward. We continue to create drugs that are real toxic, and they do destroy the tumor. They destroy good and bad cells. And for some people, the chemo takes their life, you know. So, you know, what have we learned in 42 years? What we do know is what we can do to prevent it from happening. And that's what we don't teach. Do we teach that in medicine? We don't teach that. And it really upsets me to watch, when you are in the hospital where I work, and you watch the patient come in, and you see that they're obese, they're 400 pounds, and they leave the hospital and they're 450 pounds now, that's a problem, don't you think? We are not doing what we need to do in medicine to help people get better. And I don't want to be part of something that is not doing what really should be done. I mean, the truth. I want the truth. Let's tell people the truth, and let's tell them what they need to do to stay well. Let's limit meals if they're overeating. Let's teach them. Why aren't we doing that? It makes no sense to me. And when I ask doctors about it, they don't want to hear it. It's like they're so overwhelmed with what they're doing. And I don't blame, you know, please understand, I worked in medicine most of my life. And I want to have anyone leave here thinking I'm attacking the medical professionals, because I'm not. I love them to pieces. I think they've been trained, though, in medicine a certain way. And they know only what they know, what they've been taught. And because they are taught disease, they learn the disease model, and the disease model is you do drugs to repair the disease, you diagnose, you repair, and then you do surgery, right? That's the medical model. And that's not the model I want to work in anymore. So my passion, you know, 11 years ago began because I got so sick, and I wanted to change things. And I had, you know, some diagnoses of abnormal cell growth. And when I say abnormal cell growth, I mean cysts. That's abnormal cell growth. Okay? Fibroids, abnormal cell growth. Tumors, whether they be, you know, if they're non-malignant, it's still abnormal cell growth. So when I heard that I had some of those symptoms, I knew I was in trouble. And I knew that I needed to do something different. And I knew the medical model wasn't working for me. So I took this journey of eating differently, and I started feeling better. And it was eye-opening. And I went, oh my God, if it's all about nutrition, how come we're not teaching this in medicine? It was like, wow. And so then I met up with this biochemist, and you'll hear me talk about him more and more. And I started working with him 9 years ago, him and his wife and a whole group of health professionals. And I started listening to what they were teaching, and it just changed my life even more. So I went from, you know, 11 years ago, having had joint pain for 25 years, and having psoriasis and eczema and all these other skin issues for a very long time, to not having any of it today. I am running. 2 years ago, I ran a half marathon. I ran a 5K with my daughter last year, and it was really funny because she's in her 30s, and here's mom at 61 running with her, and I was not sore at all the next day. And she got up and couldn't walk or move. And 2 weeks later, when I spoke to her, she was still sore. And I thought, wow, when you put things in your body to repair the cells, the ability for the body to do the work is incredible. And you'll get to hear more about that. So the one last thing I want to share with you is that when I got this passionate about things, I wanted to talk about it all the time because I wanted people to know, right? Like, drove my husband crazy. I mean, he just couldn't listen to it anymore. He was like full. And so we ended up having some marital issues around that. So last year in January, we did a telephone conference counseling. I had never done that before, with a Catholic counselor. And he was wonderful. His name was Ian. And it was life-changing for my husband and I. And he said to my husband, your wife had some sort of conversion. And as a result of that conversion, she is passionate about what she's learned and wants to spread the word. Do you want to keep her from doing that? And he said, absolutely not. And so we made some amends with each other, and I decided at that point, because I never heard it said that way to me before, that, you know, you had a conversion. God has given you a gift, and you have to get out there and spread the word. And so that's why I'm standing here tonight. So that's my story. So I titled it, It's Not Your Fault, because so many people don't know. I didn't know. I mean, 11, 13 years ago, I was eating, and I thought I was eating well. I really did. I mean, I went to wellness conferences for like 12 years. I was in charge of the wellness programs in the schools. So I really thought I had some good knowledge, and I thought I was eating pretty well. I just didn't know. I had no idea, and that's why it's called It's Not Your Fault, because most of us don't know. So, and I also talk about this being a journey to better health through God's pharmacy, because I so believe that God gave us what we need to make the body well. He gave us tons of plants. Globally, throughout the world, there are plants everywhere that heal the body, and we aren't using that resource. In fact, we're destroying that resource. And we're going to talk a lot about that tonight. This is an overview of what I'll be talking about over the next 4 weeks. This week, we start talking about the changes that happened from like World War II and after that until now. So we'll talk about that tonight. Next week, we'll talk about how the body adapted to those changes. Session 3 will be solving the problem. What can we do differently? And then the last session will be, okay, you've got this information. What's your desire? Where you want to go with this? How are you going to decide to move forward? And we're going to share recipes that night. We're going to share, we're going to give you a bunch of menus, different things. We'll talk about how to balance blood sugar. We're going to do a lot of that kind of stuff. Question and answer period, so all of that will be like the last session. So let's talk about what happened. Post-World War II, there were lots of changes in the food, and you'll get to see some of those changes. In 1970, high fructose corn syrup got added. That was the era. Nixon era, he was all about stabilizing food, and we'll talk about what he wanted the scientists to do to stabilize food so prices wouldn't go up. Then there was the Nurses' Health Study, one of the largest studies ever done, and we'll talk about that. The marketers and what they've done to sell their product. The food pyramid in 1980 and how that set us up for failure. And this unprecedented intake of sugar in the history of humankind. So let's look at the grocery store. So this is the grocery store, the top one, way back, right? Pre-World War II or right after World War II, mostly fruits and vegetables. You didn't see this. Now you look at this and look at the shelves in the grocery store, right? All processed stuff. About 80% of the foods in the supermarket shelves today didn't exist 100 years ago. They didn't exist. So, you know, this is all about let's eat real food. Let's go back to eating food in its natural state, the way God intended. So let's talk about high fructose corn syrup first, because I want you to understand what high fructose corn syrup is. Most people see it and they know it's a bad sugar, but they don't understand the history of high fructose corn syrup. So these two guys here, Ian Sheeny and Kurt Ellis, they did I don't know if any of you have seen King Corn. Have you seen King Corn? Okay, it's an eye-opener, isn't it? So they did this documentary, and you can all go watch it. You can just go on the internet and put in King Corn, and you can actually watch it right on the internet. But these two young men graduate from college, and when they're graduating from college, they're told in their college classes that their generation will be the first generation to not live as long as their grandparents. So they're like thinking, what? You know, why? Why is that the case? And they want to know why, so they start to investigate. And so they end up, you know, doing things like they had their hair, their flesh and hair sample done by a scientist, and the scientists found that most of their skin and hair was composed of carbon-13. Carbon-13 is corn-based, okay? So, you know, even in Mexico and the Europeans, they don't have as much corn as we do in the United States. Americans do. Now, you wouldn't expect that, would you? Because don't you think of them as eating a lot of corn products, right? But we're ingesting it more than they are. So Iowa is corn country, and quite frankly, it saved the United States during an era when we were economically struggling. When they grew the amount of corn that they grew, and they sold it in the U.S., we made a lot of money. It really was money producing for us. And then you'll see that this fertilizer called anhydrous ammonia was added to the soil. When these two men are growing their own corn, and their corn product grows pretty fast after they put this anhydrous ammonia in it. But they also, as the corn is growing and looks beautiful, they take their corn, do you remember this scene where they take the corn out and they both bite into the corn thinking, oh my God, this corn looks delicious. And they both spit it out because it tastes like ash. Now they grew it rapidly and they use these chemicals, but the corn doesn't taste good, right? But what are they going to do with that? What they do is they add things like enzymes. They boil it in hot water. They add these enzymes, and the enzymes will make it, you know, as they boil it, thicker and sweeter and sweeter and sweeter. They make high fructose corn syrup from that, and that's what they add to all our food. Read your labels. If you've not read your labels yet, look at your bread, look at your yogurt, look at your ice cream, look at your condiments, ketchup, I mean, even mustard, salad dressings, things that you would not even think of has some kind of corn. If it's not high fructose corn syrup, it's corn. So we're literally ingesting corn all day long, and we don't even know it. And we'll talk about the animals too, because we haven't talked about that yet. But so the other thing that happened was that Nixon, again, I told you Nixon wanted them to stabilize food. So he hired a bunch of scientists. And he said, I want you to stabilize this food so it doesn't spoil. Let's get it on the shelf so it lasts a long time. And that way, we won't have prices going up and down. He didn't want that interfering with his term of office as president. So the scientists set out to do that, and they added an ingredient called trans fats. Trans fats are the worst things that you can ingest that create cholesterol. They are really bad fats. And the marketers are allowed to say there's 0 trans fats on their labels, okay? But if you see this hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated fats, that's a trans fat. It's an added hydrogen that changes the fat chemical structure and it makes it stable. But our bodies, we don't know what to do with it. The body doesn't know how to deal with that. I mean, it's not something we process very well. The nurses study was done in 1980. And when the study was done, it was the largest study that had been done ever. I think it was like 5,000 nurses. So it was a huge study. And the result of that study indicated that we should be eating a lot more fiber and that we should also be having a low-fat diet, right? So as a result of that recommendation, low-fat, high-fiber meal plan is what we were told, right? So if you take fat out of food, tell me what you think it's going to taste like. Think it tastes dry, like cardboard. Tastes like cardboard, okay? So what do you think the marketers had to do to make it taste better? They added sugar. That's why they created this very first snack. Do you remember the snack? Snack Welts. Snack Welts was one of our very first desserts that was low in fat, you know, but they had to add a lot of sugar to that to make it taste good. So take the fat out, add more sugar. All right, so I want you to get the picture because as I move forward, you're going to really begin to see what's happened as a result of that, okay? Here's the food pyramid, 1980. Now, as if a lot of you might recall, the food pyramid says that we should be eating 6 to 11 servings of bread a day. That was in 1980, and we did that. We all ate that way. Most Americans eat that way today. We start off with breakfast. What do we have for breakfast? Toast, cereal, all carbohydrates, donuts, muffins, what else? Bagels, all right, pancakes, the donuts. So all of those are carbohydrates, right? And that's just breakfast. Now, we have a snack. What do people often have for snacks? Crackers. Crackers. And what do people have for lunch? Sandwiches, right? We have sandwiches. So see how we're building the day here? Then mid-afternoon, we're hungry again. Maybe we'll have a granola bar. There's some grains in there too, right? And sometimes there's added sugar in there as well. And we have dessert throughout the day too, right? So that falls under this class here. And then we have supper, and sometimes we have what? Pasta for supper, right? Right? And then we go to bed at night, we have another snack. So do you see how many carbohydrates, grains that we're ingesting? Way too much. It is medically a disaster. Us eating that way has created more disease than you can imagine. More disease than you can imagine, okay? Look at the United States obesity rate. Do you see the United States? Right here, they stand, the percent of the population older than 15 with a body mass index greater than 30. 31% United States. All of these other countries, they're not as high as us. We are the number one. We're the number one, okay? So, and Korea is 3% here, okay? So Korea is, is eating a lot different than we are, I'm sure. And now we look at past and projected future overweight rates in selected countries. So look at the US. So this is projected now. They're projecting that we will continue to climb by 2020. The second one is England. And then we go to Australia. Australia is going to catch up with us. They're moving fast to catch up with us because they've changed the way they're eating. And so as more and more people adopt American ways, they're also beginning to gain the weight as we have. This isn't your typical 1960 young man. That's what we typically saw in 1960. Remember that a serving was much smaller in 1960 than it is today. You didn't go to McDonald's and get a big tumbler of soda. You got a little tiny glass, 6 to 8 ounces. Today it's huge. Everything is, large portions, and as a result of that, we've, begun to really put on some weight, and we're seeing more and more of this. Now, I can tell you that I have made home visits as a school nurse, because I worked in a downtown school in Lewiston, so a lot of our children didn't have phones, so I often had to walk them home if they were sick, or those kinds of things. Or sometimes I would get called in because maybe somebody didn't want to come to school because they were ill, or if they said they were ill, and so the school nurse needed to go check the young man out to see. And I would often find, a lot of these homes are poor homes, so I would often find them on mattresses on the floor, and the young man would have this big canister of soda and was drinking out of that big canister all day long and all night long. And those young people are very, very overweight. This is what we saw a lot of in the school system. And as a school nurse, I saw the changes over time with how sickly children were getting. I mean, I started as a nurse in 1974. We didn't have allergies that we have today. We didn't have asthma. When I started as a school nurse, I think I had 4 or 5 kids in my school that had asthma, and when I left, I had 50. There's a problem there. There's absolutely a problem, and we have to do something about that. The diabetic rates in children is escalating. It used to be when you were a diabetic child, it was juvenile diabetes. And then we had the adult onset diabetes in adults. We no longer can classify it that way. Why? Because now our children have the adult onset, so we now call it type 2 diabetes. Type 1, juvenile, used to be called. That's type 1 now, and type 2 is the adult onset, but we're seeing it in children a lot more often than ever before. Robyn O'Brian is a wonderful woman who used to work as a food analyst. And you'll hear her talk about how she has made a complete turn around because of what happened to her personally. So sometimes when life deals us with things, we are exposed to something that makes us move in a new direction, right? Well, that happened to Robyn, and it's a great story. I think you'll really enjoy it. Anyone ever see this map? It's the CDC map of the United States and the obesity rates. I'm going to kind of go through these pretty quickly, but I want you to see the changes that start occurring. And it starts in 1985, and you see the white they don't have any data yet for those particular states. Light blue is over 10% obesity, and the darker blue is 10 to 14% obesity. So it's a BMI over 30 or 30 pounds overweight for a 5'4" person. So that's the average that they're looking at. So watch this. This is really interesting. Okay, this is 1986, 87, 88, 89, 90. We now have a new color because we now have 15 to 19% of people overweight in these particular states. Now watch. (1997). We now have a new color again because we've got over 20% obesity here. And you'll start to see that spread. This is 2004, 2005. We got another new color, some new colors here. 20 to 24% overweight, 25 to 29, and over here we're going to head toward 30%. Oh, and interesting, look at this. My Colorado friends love this because Colorado's still in the blue range here. So they're eating a little healthier in that state. So let's keep going. 2009, 2010. So now look at this. So in 1980, 1970, 1980, we saw what the obesity rates were. Now, remember what we did in 1980. We changed things, right? We changed the food pyramid. We did the nurses study. We made recommendations. We based everything on that. We said a low-fat, high-fiber diet would be the way to go, right? Remember that? Do you see what's happened as a result? Do you know that we have more cardiovascular disease today than we did back then? Under those recommendations, all right? So this is 1990. This is 2010. Look at the change, okay? So these are just citations from your CDC. So Food Incorporated is another clip I want to show you. It's a great video, and I can't show it all, the whole video to you because it's an hour and a half. But it's so well done. And I'm going to go get my book here real quick because I think it's an important piece. They talk a lot about CAFOs, C-A-F-O. And this gentleman, Michael Pollan, in his book, calls it Omnivore's Dilemma. It's a great book. I've got another book over there that's his as well, where he talks about what we've done to our animals and how we've changed the way that we feed animals, right? We now have them in what we call CAFOs. CAFOs are these great big kind of fenced-in areas where all the animals are gathered together, and they're all kind of fed in a row, crowded together in this area, and they're fed corn grain and other kinds of grains and fillers. Now think about animals and what they're meant to do. They are meant to graze and to eat grass in the pasture. But we're now feeding them these grains. And so he talks a lot about this. He also talks about what happens is that these animals now, they're sick. And the vets will go to see the animals, and they will like make a hole on the wall of the animals because the animals are sick. And they'll pull out the lumen of that animal. And when you look at the lumen, it's all kind of damaged from eating corn grain. And so the vet talks about how it's his job, or her job, if it's a female, to keep that animal healthy and alive until they're big enough to slaughter, to use the meat to sell for us to buy. And so the vet will then give them antibiotics and any drugs that they can give them to keep them alive for that period of time. The meat, now understand, animals are not grazing out in the sunlight. These calf are usually covered barns, so they're not grazing outside, they're not eating grass, they're injected with lots of antibiotics and hormones, and their meat is very marbly and lots of fat. And it's not good omega-3 fat, it's bad fat. And we'll talk more about fats in the weeks to come. Omega-6 fat is an inflammatory fat. Omega-3 is an anti-inflammatory fat. So these animals are ending up with meat that has a lot more of the bad fat in it than the good fat. Okay, so are you getting the picture of where we're getting our meats from? These animals also are eliminating in the soil all of this stuff, and as this stuff is eliminated, it goes into the environment. Sometimes it's used for gardens to give the garden some of the what you need to fertilizer and enrich the soil, right? Or it goes down into the streams or the water, and all of that stuff goes into there. Bad bacteria is in there. It's destroying some of our sea life, our seafood, and it's causing problems like, some of you may remember the spinach that was contaminated with E. coli, right? That's part of what goes on. That's part of the problem, all right? And so he talks a lot about that in Omnivore's Dilemma. So it's really a kind of a great book. Within the context of that video, there's a woman in there whose little boy who is 4 years old, and she talks about how she goes on a trip with her husband. It's a family vacation. And during that family vacation, they stop to eat burgers. And they have burgers at a couple of places that week. And her little 4-year-old ends up very ill. And she brings him into the hospital, and she talks about in this video, it's heart-wrenching to hear her, because she talks about how her little boy is so sick in this hospital, and there's nothing they can do. He has this E. coli. We all have E. coli, by the way, in our stool, but this is a type of E. coli that is very difficult to treat, because there's all kinds of strains of E. coli. And they are not able to treat him, and he dies at 4 years of age after a vacation. So at the end of the clip I'm going to show you, you will see Mom being kind of interviewed. She doesn't want to give a lot of information, because what she does is she tries to fight this, because she wants a new law in place to prevent this from happening to anyone else. She wants what happened to her child to be meaningful, and she wants to prevent other children from getting these ill from it. So she fights for legislation to change it, and she ends up having to back away because she's afraid to lose everything she has because of the threats of lawsuit. And you'll also see there's a gentleman who has been planting like the heirloom seed. It's pure, it's never been tampered with. It's the seed that you'll get the best nutrient from, and there's nothing that's been genetically modified in that seed, and how he cleans them for the farmer. But because they bring him to court, he ends up wanting, that he's going to lose everything if he continues cleaning the seed. He ends up selling his business. So I just want you to get a picture of how tremendous the force is out there and how difficult this is. This is an uphill journey. And so the more of us that gain this knowledge and the more we spread it, the better it's going to be for us and our children and our families. I think it gives a powerful message, and it's really the message that I wanted to leave you all with tonight, because I just want you to understand that we are the ones that are going to change this. And the more knowledge that we gain, the more that we know, the more likely we are to affect that change. And the more people we tell, the more that we're likely to have things happen. Oh, I want to talk about this real quick. Just so you know, remember that the animals that are eating the grain are more acidic. They're using antibiotics and other medication. Again, I told you that we want to keep them alive for 6 months. Remember the high fructose corn syrup we talked about, cheaper food, loss of great health as a result, diseased animals, soil that's also depleted from nutrients, water pollution, antibiotic use, foodborne illness, environmental costs, obesity, diabetes, autoimmune diseases are all a result of all of this. I hope you enjoyed tonight, And we'll see you next Thursday, and we will begin to talk about what has happened as a result. And we'll talk more about cardiovascular, diabetes, all of those things. And all of it's going to come together every week as you come and join me. So you are welcome. Thank you.